All right, we will begin now. Liberal internationalism, as you see, derives its meaning from the ideology of liberalism. Ism is important because in the Enlightenment discourse, the idea of liberalism plays a very important role, and we cannot understand what is enlightenment without reference to liberalism. So, in the previous lecture, I told you about the ideal phase of liberalism, that is the interwar period. Today, I will tell you about the classical emergence of liberalism, the context in which liberalism emerged, and that context was provided by, as I told you earlier, by the idea of enlightenment, human enlightenment, that is to focus upon not any external authority, any god or any other thing, but on the human soul, on the human being. So liberalism is also commonly known as humanism, some people call it, and they go on to further discuss about, for example, John Locke and John Stuart Mill, J.S. Mill, and Jeremy Bentham. All right, these are founding fathers of classical liberalism. Bentham. Today, I will one by one discuss what John Locke said, what John Stuart Mill said, and what Jeremy Bentham said. So if you look at these keywords, you find that we have international as a keyword in the liberal idea. We have order, which is order means rule of law, governed by a common set of rule of law, which actually guides the behavior of the states. And we have justice, we have peace, we have international society, uh, civil society, international society by Hedley Bull invented concept, and we have democracy, common institutions, rule of law, universal human rights, constitutionalism, international jurisprudence, etc. At the heart of liberal discourse, liberal political discourse in general. We will not be able to make sense of what liberalism actually is without reference to its generality. That is what it is in general. How do we make sense of it? And then when we understand the core principle of liberalism in general, we apply the same principles to understand the politics of globalization in contemporary era. I told you in the previous lecture that international relations, although I gave you the reference of Thucydides, and Thucydides, in his book History of Peloponnesian War, written in 401 BC, tells us about the role of power in international politics. No, and he says that the weak accept what they have to accept, and the powerful do what they have to do. So that is the role of power for the first time being illuminated by none other than Thucydides. And you will realize later, when I was telling you about the concept of anarchy, I was also telling you about the role of sovereign power, the power of the state, the point that there is no other more powerful entity in the international affairs which can regulate the common affairs of the state other than one individual state or pooled sovereignty. For example, in the case of United Nations Security Council, to control, regulate, and manage the affairs of the world. So there is anarchy and there is asymmetry of power in international politics, which means that individual states are free to behave as they want to behave, provided that they have sufficient and enough power to absorb the shock, the reaction which comes out of that kind of behavior. So, John Locke is called the father of liberalism. If you will read the literature, you will find it. He's called the father of liberalism. And he gave the principle of uh, life, liberty, and property as the sine qua non or the compulsory component of liberal idea. That is, in order to have a liberal society, you must have a system of rights which protects the life of the individual, and you must ensure individual liberty, that is laissez-faire, whatever people want to do. They must be allowed to do it, provided that they do not harm other people, which I will come to J.S. Mill, harm principle, and property. For the first time, John Locke was credited uh, with legalizing, giving a legal tone to property in the sense that it is an inalienable right. He told that life, liberty, and property, right to life, liberty, and property is inalienable, which is you cannot separate these things, number one, from you by yourself. Number two, nobody else can separate it from you. Inalienability means it cannot be separated from you. It is the very essence and soul of individual. What life, liberty, and property. And then comes the most significant. This is 1750s. He's writing Locke. Actually, he wrote the treatise on government in 1688 or 1 year earlier, because after that the glorious revolution in England happened after his writing, no, Sunday Revolution. So in the next century we find Jeremy Bentham, who was actually a very good friend with the father of John Stuart Mill. His name was James Mill, and these thinkers were known as utilitarians. All right, why utilitarians? What is utility? All those from economics, you might be aware of the word utility. Utility refers to the use value, that which satisfies, that which makes somebody happy, that which makes somebody appeased in their need and want. So these utilitarian thinkers, they said that since now we live in the age of reason and humanism and so on, now our job is actually to maximize the happiness of the maximum number of people. Maximize the happiness of the maximum number of people. Maximum happiness for the maximum number. And Jeremy Bentham was actually credited with inventing the utilitarian theory, but John Stuart Mill took it forward, but he left it behind, because I will tell you how. Uh, uh, Jeremy Bentham also invented the concept of international. I told you in the previous lecture that the concept of international society was invented by Hedlebo, but the concept of international, one of the keywords. Why you need to understand it? Because earlier in the medieval period, nation states were actually, or state, whatever they call, they were isolated units. They had nothing to do with it, and they were not interacting with each other. But because of the colonial adventure, discovery of America, Indies, and so on, people started knowing each other. And with that came the concept of internationalism and interdependence. What is interdependence? That is the next thing that you need to understand. Interdependence refers in international politics to the fact that every single state is connected with the other state either through the principle of relative advantage or comparative advantage or absolute advantage. No, some commodity, some service, some raw material, one nation enjoys or one state enjoys abundance and the other scarcity. So it, because now the logistical and supply chain is so good, so people can actually exchange and have a kind of interdependence in world affairs. So under liberal philosophy, now coming from enlightenment, being enunciated by John Stuart Mill, John Locke, and John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. The role of John Stuart Mill, if it is important at all in international politics, is limited to one and only one thing, and that is to have a just society. Just society. So the word justice was also prominent actually, and he wrote a book titled On Liberty, which is a treatise on the concept of freedom, human freedom under the state. No, so it reverberated all of these ideas because they are free from the medieval superstition, medieval admixture of theology into politics. So all of that was dusted, and the reason, that is why when you do the reading, Willis and Smith, you will also find the word reason somewhere as one of the key component of the liberal philosophy in the reading. So on liberty, he tells us that the condition of human freedom is actually this: that if I am stating a particular opinion, I am correct to the extent that the other person can rectify me, and not more than that, not less than that. No? So I have my own right to say what I want to say, provided that I do not poke my nose in others' affairs and I do no harm to other people. That is no harm principle enunciated by John Stuart Mill. So here we find through John Locke, John Stuart Mill, and Jeremy Bentham only five words. Those are right to inalienable right to life, liberty, and property to everybody. And the second one is John Locke's just society, how to have a just society, and how to secure freedom for the individual, because individualism is actually the core principle of liberalism. No, and the third one, Jeremy Bentham, gives us the concept of international, which was further expanded and invented. Was invented as a new phrase, international society, by Hedley Bull, who wrote the book Anarchical Society, uh, a study of order in world politics in 1978. So this is what we get with reference to classical emergence of liberalism and its current usage by Hedley Bull. But what we need to understand when studying the liberal approach to international politics is actually, it could be pointed out as a numbered list. Uh, how you are going to conceptualize the problem, that is the liberal approach to study global politics. Nitty-gritty approach, obviously, I told you, refers to either perspective or your vantage point or from the direction from which you are approaching the subject matter. So liberalism, because it tells us that the core philosophy of liberalism is now coming up. Number one, individualism, or maybe you could be more precise and give the first spot to humanism. All right, because unlike the other medieval philosophies, wherein the center of the whole discussion was some otherworldly god or so on, in the Enlightenment period, if you refer to the work of Enlightenment thinkers such as uh, Dante Alighieri, and who was the other people, they were actually very humanist. Rise of Humanism, you must have done it with enlightenment in your 10 plus 2 textbooks. No, humanism coming with enlightenment, individualism, and then a right to life, liberty, and property, right system. Actually, you could universal rights or right system backed by legal institutional mechanism. No, and fourth would be free trade and so on, because it is a cognate part of the right system. No, and other than that, I think not much here. Yes, of course. Then to preserve all that, to preserve all that, we will have to have constitutionalism, that is a republican constitution which is backed by the consent of the people rather than the monarch. And then we have to have rule of law, which governs the right universal rights system. And other than that, what else comes under liberal framework? Yes, sometimes they called it constitutionalism is an institution. Constitution is an institution only. But institutionalism is also one of the keywords in liberal discourse on politics in general and global politics in particular, wherein we find two variations of the word institutionalism. One is old institutionalism and the other is new institutionalism. All right. We will discuss it in detail. But I think if we move now, because in 19th century, we move to 19th century, we look at liberal history, how it was liberal societies from the West who had a semblance of democracy. But you must always remember that in the 19th century, women were not allowed to vote either in UK or any other country. No, they got the right to franchise very late, which you will read under the alternative perspectives to globalization, wherein we will discuss the gender concept, no, gender justice and so on. So here, in the 19th century, liberalism became a very powerful tool to justify imperial domination by the colonizing countries, the colonial mother countries, including Holland, Portugal, Spain, and UK. They were the front runners of the in the colonial subjugation of the East. So, for example, how was that done? How was that done? What was the conceptual invention? What was the discourse? What was the written justification for exploitation and depredation of the people far and wide, ranging from Australia to Southeast Asia and from South Asia to Latin America? So two theories were invented. I have been always telling you, and I told you that our syllabus is very much connected. White man's burden, which I will connect to the contemporary period also. We have cognate concept in the contemporary period, and other was the French phrase, which is actually mission civilisatrice. They call it in French. In English, it is translated as civilizing mission. All right. So these two concepts they invented, and their evangelical missionaries went away to the faraway land, telling that the societies that you are primitive, you are tribal. They were also the same people, no, before that, and telling other people that because we have an enlightened idea of what human progress means, allow me to teach you, to tell you, and so on and so forth. So when I tell you, for example, that I am superior to you and I have a superior culture than you, so I acquire your consent by, obviously, by proving, giving points, 2 points, for example, white man's burden and civilizing mission. So Englishman Rudyard Kipling saying that it is the burden of the white man to go far and wide and to civilize the barbarian. All right. And same in the case of the French, that it is the mission of the French civilized people to civilize the barbarians. No? And now they are going and preaching the same principle. And in that process, first of all, intellectually rendering millions of people and the ancient civilizations ranging from China to India to Egypt to oblivion, and while thumping this liberal idea that we now have to open the world market so that the mercantile class, you must remember 19th century, what we call capitalist class today was a mercantile class. Mercantile class refers to a group of people who form a guild, that is they live in a particular corner of the city, and they pool the money and invest the money in voyage and so on outside, so that they can procure very high demand raw materials such as pepper and so on, and they can sell it at a very high margin in the Western market. So that becomes a part, and this is the 19th century story, wherein we find the word civilizing mission and the missio civilisatres, which is an invention of the liberal discourse on colonialism, on internationalism, on the expansion of trade globally. So 19th century less or more liberalism is a liberalism which justified colonialism, which justified imperialism. And in the 20th century, because of the writing of Karl Marx in the middle of the 19th century, people started becoming aware of the real contradiction. That is the contradiction between the rich and the poor across the world. And the slogan that the working people of the world unite, you have the whole world to win, less or more. That was the ultimate. So without the Marxist critique of liberalism and realist critique of liberalism, you will not be able to make proper sense of it. The conceptuality I very summarily outlined that the core principle of liberalism is humanism, number one, enlightenment humanism, number two, individualism, number three, the system of universal rights. No, what does it refer to? Those from not political science, you must focus on it. Rights here refers to a set of codified principles which will protect your right as an individual, and it will not be protected as a kind of sleight of hand, but through institutions, legal mechanism, jurisprudence, and the court of law for the enforcement of that right. That is what it refers to. Free trade refers to we have this inward looking, that we are self-sufficient, we will manage on our own within our border. So getting away from that self-satisfying dream or so on, and believing that we can interact with the world in a very interdependent manner, wherein we can exploit the 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 relative advantage or comparative advantage or absolute advantage that different countries enjoy. You will read this relative advantage, comparative advantage, and absolute advantage in political economy. I told you, but that is what free trade is. Concept of political economy only. No, that is why it is coming up here. Constitutionalism refers to the point that every constitution has democracy as its truth, republican democracy as its truth, and to the extent that a constitution is not democratic, it is false. All right. So, in order to have a democracy, republican democracy, you must have a constitution. A constitution enacted by people wherein their rights and obligations are properly written, and then you have a judiciary to enforce, argue, interpret the constitution in the light of the day as we move. And then rule of law. Why rule of law? Because the word order is very important. No, one more word if we could add. Ultimately, which is the conclusion of the liberal approach. Order is international order. Hedley Bull's most famous classical book, coming as a component of the liberal internationalism, or English school is also known as liberal internationalism. So, the title, as I told you, study of order in world politics. He is studying only one word, that is order. What is order? No. So, rule of law, because if you do not have a common rule of law, then the powerful will exploit the weak. But if you have rule of law, that is equal protection by the law and equality before the law, then people will be treated as equal and they will be protected as such. So one thing I missed with reference to Jeremy Bentham, which I remember now, Jeremy Bentham is also credited with inventing the word international jurisprudence, which is very important for us to understand. What is jurisprudence? First of all, you should be able to understand. And if you are, you could tell me what is jurisprudence, guys? Sorry, 940. So I was asking something else, by the way. Jurisprudence refers to uh, adjudication and interpretation of the law. Juris is law, prudence is wisdom. No, wisdom about the law. So, jurisprudence, international jurisprudence refers to understanding and codifying international law to protect universal human community, and having an institution which actually interprets that law, understands that law, and actually, if there is any infirmity or problem, does away with that law. So we have now today International Court of Justice, we have European Court of Justice, and we have other mechanisms, and European Court of Human Rights. For example, those who perpetrated crimes in Rwanda, they were put to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, and and the trials happened. We also know that during the German Holocaust, uh, a lot of people from Nuremberg trials, they were put to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, and they were brought to book. So that's all from my side for today, and we'll continue to engage progressively with it with the help of only keywords and concepts which you will find in the reading. All right, and but for today, you could take only that much as the crux of the lecture. That is what is liberalism, what are its core principles, core words that we use. No, the 7, 8 core words. Tomorrow we will just discuss it, but how it has been in the 20th century, and probably in the next lecture I will refer to the period after the dissolution of the USSR. All right.